is concerned that a bilingual learner is struggling, what are some examples of resources that you might recommend to them?
From my point of view, the main resource in every one of our schools is the EL specialist. So if a bilingual student is struggling in certain academic area, the first person that I would contact as a general ed teacher is the EL specialist. So the EL specialist can look closely at the student language development and how the acquisition of the second language is happening, in what stages, what's the level of acculturation that the student has, so they can proceed to identify authentic interventions to language development and collect data to see the progress in those interventions.
I would agree with everything that Maria Eugenia just shared. I also think that our ELL specialists are a really great source of information anytime that we are concerned about the progress of a bilingual student. I think also just keeping in mind some of the typical patterns of language acquisition that we see, like sometimes students might be experiencing language loss, they might be shifting in terms of which language is stronger depending on what their language environment is. So just making sure that we have a really good understanding of the language acquisition piece, and that we're providing interventions that are sensitive to that area, and definitely tracking progress.
What questions do our teams need to consider before referring a bilingual student for a special education evaluation?
Special education team, SST teams, action teams, student success teams, all these teams we have to support processes before students are referred. They need to be looking at, maybe not a checklist, but looking at the protocols and the processes that we have in place, that they are all based on research for students who are bilingual, to make sure that all the interventions that the general ed classroom teacher and the EL specialist have to do to detangle language from disability. Specifically for bilingual students or EL students, you have to really do interventions from this time to this time and collect data. I wouldn't use the word fidelity, but in a way you have to be with fidelity to the time, allowing the student time to demonstrate what they know, what their assets are, what their struggles really are, if the intervention is working or not. So just making sure that each of the protocols that we have in place familiarize with the EL website and all the resources embedded in there, so they can really support students without the rush of the urgency that sometimes their needs bring to us as teachers, and we really want to serve them, and with the best intentions, but we have to be mindful that just not serving them for serving them, but serving them with a purpose. Mm-hmm. And the purpose is differentiate between language development and disability.
So again, I would agree with everything that Maria Eugenia shared. And then I think just looking at where the student is on their language journey, realizing that language development, and especially bilingual language development, is a journey. So is this a student who's a simultaneous bilingual? Is this a student who is a sequential bilingual who's just starting to add a new language? When we are looking at the interventions that we're providing, are those interventions provided in all of the languages that that student is currently working on? Have those interventions been culturally responsive? And just doing everything that we can to match our instruction to the individual needs of that student. I would also say being really specific about what our concerns are. Like if we have a concern about reading, is that at the level of decoding? Is that at the level of fluency? And has our intervention been targeted towards exactly what that area of concern is? And I think one of the big points that Maria Eugenia made is not having that sense of urgency. So just trying to make sure that we give the student time to respond to interventions, to progress through their language development trajectory before we jump to bringing in the special education team.
So I just wanted to ask you both if there's anything else that you would want to have people consider as they are working with their students who are emerging bilinguals or already bilingual.
To remember that every student is an individual, so looking at the various students we have who are learning multiple languages in our district, they all are individuals, they have unique experiences with those languages. So even though there are some resources that might work for different students, just making sure that you really get to know that particular student's story and experiences as you're making plans for how to support them. My name is Magali Gonzalez Hiltner, and I am a support specialist and autism consultant in the Hill High Feeder. Currently, all of the schools that I work with are dual language schools. So I work a lot with our special education teams to support individual students. And often the students who we work on are dual identified, so they're receiving special education services and are also developing bilingual students. So on a case-by-case basis, I often come up with plans for making sure that they're receiving appropriate services and making progress.
I'm Maria Eugenia Olivar, and I support bilingual and dual language programs pre-K-12.
What's the type of support you offer bilingual students?
Depending on need. One common thing is working on coaching cycles with teachers, looking closely at student needs according to data, helping them identify authentic interventions for literacy, for writing in Spanish mostly, and working also with bilingual students that are in non-dual schools, so they have access to the native component of Spanish literacy.